In this week's Capitol Report, a project to protect Minnesota waters and a message to parents to help their students succeed. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Capitol Report. I'm Julie Bartkey. Minnesotans value their parks, trails, and the outdoors, and they have approved funding sources to ensure the protection of them. This commission, made up of a blend of legislators and citizens, is the driving force behind funding projects aimed at protecting and enhancing Minnesota's air, water, land, fish, wildlife, and other natural resources. That is the mission of the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. Their funding comes primarily from lottery proceeds, and since the creation of the LCCMR back in 1963, more than $650 million has gone to fund projects aimed at protecting and enhancing the environment. Members spend months listening to presentations and touring project sites as they prioritize certain projects, preparing to make recommendations to the legislature. At times, the policies behind the goals can cause some concern with members, such as this discussion on cracking down on boaters who may spread invasive zebra mussels from one lake to another.
So we talked about water access BMPs. One of the keys is that many of our accesses were not designed with invasive species in mind. And as they develop new accesses or they want to look to retrofit current accesses, how can we develop these type of sites that are conducive? So you have sites that have pullover, they have prep areas where they can pull over. They have areas that if you wash your boat, it drains away from the lake. It provides places to be able to put your invasive species if you find them, the designated cleaning locations, signage, proper signage. So there's this whole compilation of efforts to redesign and think about how we do this, not only so it's easy for the user, the lake user, to get on and off the water body, but also can they take those efforts to help prevent the spread.
At some point, we may need to consider that if you've been in a contaminated lake, you shouldn't be allowed to go into an uncontaminated one. It may not be for a long time, but stay out of there. I mean, if you've made the choice that you want to fish or do whatever in a contaminated lake, then you've also made the choice not to jeopardize an uncontaminated lake. And while if we're getting the kinds of monitoring that would make it possible, or the inspections or the cleaning or whatever else might be needed along these lines, because I mean, these are some major things that are happening to our lakes here, and I think of any state, we have an awful lot to lose. And so every interest group, it isn't one, we shouldn't be pointing fingers at lakeshore owners or fisher, the ones that are the users of it. They're all going to be affected.
Joining me is Chair of the LCCMR, Tom Hackbarth, to talk a little bit about what's next for projects and appropriations. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. And as you know, we are having a little commission hearing today. And we're doing an overview of some of the work programs, some of the work projects, and we're looking at past projects that have been done, those kinds of things. But yes, in the upcoming legislative session and in the future, we look to be maybe moving in a little bit different direction with LCCMR. We've got legacy funds that are in place now. Some of those things are funding through, some of the things we funded in the past are now being funded through legacy. So we're trying to focus LCCMR more on some more specific projects.
Such as?
Well, things like, I know that the Asian carp issue, invasive species, things like that are becoming more and more prevalent in the state of Minnesota. In our commission hearing today, we're looking at some of those things, and I think we'll be seeing more in that direction too.
Would you say that there might be more money then as well for research and development as well?
I think that's what we're going to be looking at is rather than funding some purchases of land and things like that, it's going to be more of a research focused initiative and doing more studies and things like that that we have to do.
There was a little bit of controversy last session over projects that were included that involved renewable energy and global warming. Do you think that these kind of projects warrant some consideration as well?
Well, they might warrant, you know, something to look at for some particular reason or whatever. But I think we need to focus more, LCCMR, more on the projects that we were just discussing, things that are emerging issues that we have to deal with right now. I don't think that was probably the appropriate thing to do, but the legislature approved it, et cetera. That's all fine. But we need to move away from some of those things and get to more of the specific issues that we have to face now.
Do you think that this new focus, primarily research and development, with some maintaining of environmental excuse me, issues as well, do you think that that is still in line with the integrity of the mission of the LCCMR?
Oh, I think it absolutely is. One of the things that we were looking at today was looking at an issue that was funded through Bowser and through the University of Minnesota and University of Minnesota Duluth on, and it was the original focus, I think, of something that LCCMR wanted to do, or LCMR wanted to do, was to look at the benefit that we're receiving from putting some of these funds into some of these land projects, and particularly CRP, and are we doing it correctly? Are we going to be putting money into the right areas of land that do have the critical need for protection? And we funded that study, and I think those are the kinds of things that we should be doing that benefit the best on where we should be putting money in the future.
I want to look ahead a little bit to the future. During the last budget cycle, first of all, requests totaling more than $160 million were received to the LCCMR. Roughly $50 million was allocated. Let's fast forward now to this next budget cycle. This will come, most of the funding, as most people know, comes primarily from lottery proceeds. Now, roughly $8 million in lottery money was lost during the state government shutdown. How do you see this impacting the bottom line, and more importantly, the number of projects that may be funded?
I really don't think that the shutdown is going to affect that much. I mean, it's a very small portion. It doesn't really affect the corpus of the account of LCCMR. I think we're going to be fine in that regard. I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. I do think that as we progress and maybe we see some other forms of gaming coming in, maybe with funding for maybe a casino, that's going to bring even more money to the corpus account.
I think it's fair to say that during this recession and all of the subsequent cuts, changes, more and more lawmakers, GOP and DFL, talk about partnering. So given the different pots of money available for environmental issues, you brought up a little bit with the legacy funds, the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council. How do you see these councils, commissions, et cetera, all working together? Do they work together? Well,
that's just it. I don't know that they do work together. And as co-chair of the LCCMR, I want that to happen. I want to work with Lessard Sam's council and work together to, you're going to do some of these projects, we're going to do some of these. Some of these we have to fund together. We'll give some of the money, you give some of the money. So I want to bring that together better than it has been in the past. Of course, Lessard Sam's is very, very new. But with me being the co-chair of the LCCMR, I would like to bring those two together and work together much, much closer than it has in the past.
Another thing that has sprung out of this, in my opinion, is accountability. There needs to be more accountability for different projects and programs. Is that something that you see needs strengthening as well?
Absolutely. More accountability, particularly from the different groups that are coming in and applying for the funds and getting the funds. We did approve a couple of the work plans today that we're moving forward, and they've done a good job. But we do need more accountability from some of these folks to find out exactly where this money is going. I think the LCCMR is going to move in the direction, like we said earlier, of better establishing where we want to spend this money for research and studies, but also for on-the-ground issues. Not necessarily buying land, but let's put the money to work. Let's see something tangible, such as we're going to have a site visit today over at the University of Minnesota Laboratories on Mississippi River to look at the fish barriers for invasive Asian carp and the bubble barriers and things that they're going to have there. So we want to look at those kinds of things so we can spend money in smart ways.
Okay, my last question for you. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in the future, but what are some of your expectations as funding, as you start hearing proposals for projects in the upcoming months?
Well, we're going to hear more from other members and where they want to see the money spent and what their ideas are too. So we're going to hear more from them. And tomorrow we're going to be going on a site visit throughout the state, or more around the metropolitan area. But we're going to look at some of the proposals that have been submitted to LCCMR to see where we want to spend that money. So I think the site visits are important to find out exactly what's going on. I think we're going to see quite a difference in LCCMR in the upcoming years.
And in your opinion, good differences?
Very good differences.
Okay. Yeah. Chair Hackbarth, thanks so much for joining us
today.
We certainly appreciate it.
Quite all right.
As you heard, the LCCMR is tasked with enhancing and protecting the environment and natural resources. The recent discovery of some invasive carp in Minnesota waters has officials fishing for ways to prevent them from infiltrating into our lakes and streams. We caught up with DNR Commissioner Tom Landwehr a few weeks ago to get his perspective on fighting the invasive species.
The only 100% effective way to stop Asian carp from moving upstream is a physical barrier that provides at least 10 feet or more of drop. They can jump, you've seen the videos, they can jump 4, 5, 6 feet high, but they can't jump 10 feet high, they can't jump 20 feet high. If we could put a physical barrier in place that provides that amount of elevation, that will be a complete barrier. Unfortunately, the number of opportunities for that type of a barrier in Minnesota on the St. Croix or the Mississippi are very limited. In the St. Croix, we have a natural barrier at St. Croix Falls, which provides that. In the Mississippi, we have a natural barrier that provides that at St. Anthony Falls. But of course, at St. Anthony Falls, we have put in a lock and dam system that helps bridge that divide. So right now, we don't have physical barriers that do that in the places we want them. We're looking at some options. We will be improving the Coon Rapids Dam via some bonding money the legislature gave us last session that will be a mostly effective barrier at Coon Rapids. And we're looking at a sonic and bubbler barrier at the mouth of St. Croix River in Prescott that can help deter Asian carp migration, but it won't stop them completely. So we had a meeting earlier this week, as you know, with several agency heads, federal agency heads, and the congressional delegation to talk about one preferred option, which is to make the St. Anthony Falls Dam a more effective barrier for Asian carp. And that's one of the things we see in the short term as being one of our more viable solutions to keep fish from moving up the river.
A bubble barrier designed to stop carp from moving freely in Minnesota streams is currently being tested by the University of Minnesota. It's one project funded by the LCCMR. Members recently toured the St. Anthony Falls site to get an update on the project. We caught up with Professor of Civil Engineering Vaughn Voller to get his perspective on working with the LCCMR and to learn more about the barrier. Give me a brief overview in layman's terms, if you could, about the bubble and the intent behind it and results that you're seeing thus far.
So the idea is to try and act as a control for common carp, not to be too confused with Asian carp, but they've been in Minnesota. They are an invasive species. They're not meant to be here, but they've been here for about 100 years. And they have a very detrimental effect on water quality in lakes. They tend to stir up the sediments because of their feeding habits, and they create lots of cloudiness in the lakes. So the idea is to try and control the movement of these carps between the lakes. And carp, unlike other fish, actually have a very, they're referred to as hearing specialists. They can actually hear better than other fish can over a much wider frequency range into much lower decibel levels, which is determining the kind of noise levels. And so the idea is that when bubbles are made from a release, they make a noise. And the noise is controlled by the size of the hole, the rate at which they release, and the rate at which you pump air into the device that's making the bubbles. So the idea is to have a bubble barrier and create this noise, and the fish don't like it, and they get perturbed, and the idea is that they won't go through a system if you can make it efficient enough that they just don't like having the bubbles. So what we've been doing is testing how effective such a barrier would be. And for the last year and a half or so, we've been running experiments in St. Paul in a confined laboratory environment. And we showed that with the barriers in place, the number of crossings falls by about 75%. So they're not 100% effective, but they certainly have an effect of deterring the fish from crossing the barrier. And the next stage of the project is to take this out and put it into the field. There's a big difference between doing something in the lab and doing something in the field. And here at St. Anthony Falls, at the laboratory here, we have a great facility, outdoor stream lab, which will allow us to actually see how a bubble barrier like this could work in the field, or how it would work in the field.
And just to clarify, the bubble barriers are for lakes or for rivers?
They will be for effectively for the small streams that connect between rivers. The idea is to have a device that you can, that's very movable, easy to put in place, and you'll put into place at certain times of year, like during the breeding season or when the juveniles want to be recruited back into the main lakes to try and stop the movement or deter the movement of those fish.
DNR Commissioner Tom Landwehr was saying earlier this month that he's interested in something similar to this that could be used to prevent the spread of Asian carp from getting into Minnesota waters. Is that something, are you looking a little further down the road with this as well?
I mean, clearly, because that problem has become more and more pressing as this process has been going on, we can't avoid that. And there are very clear similarities between Asian carp and common carp. So, and there's established technology. I mean, there is available technology for bubble barriers that have been used, normally in a situation to deter fish away from going into a power plant, rather than trying to stop them in their tracks, which is what we're trying to do. And so there's a clear connection, and we are thinking ahead to that point. But I think it's important to recognise that our results show that there is an effect of these bubbles, but we're not clear how. They're clearly not 100% effective even in the limited environments we've been looking at. And we need to do the research to find out how it might operate in the kind of system that they're looking at, say, at the end of the St. Croix River, which is much wider and deeper and way wider and way deeper than the systems that we've been looking at to this point.
You touched on research. The LCCMR is moving more into the direction of perhaps funding research and development projects instead of per se buying land. And it's a new direction that Chair Hackbarth was saying he'd like to go. As somebody who has worked with the LCCMR, how would you explain your relationship with the commission and in getting this project funded and in the communication while it's been ongoing?
I think as far as I can see, it's been a very supportive environment. I've had nothing but good input, good advice and good direction from the commission and from the staff at the commission. And I feel like as these events have evolved and things have moved forward with the Asian carp in particular, that we've been kept very much in the loop, and people seem to be interested in promoting what we're trying to do and putting it in the right context of the research. So I think it's been an excellent experience up to this point, and I hope it continues.
LCCMR funds are typically very sought after. If you were to give advice to somebody who is trying to prepare a presentation for a project, any advice that you'd like to give?
I think importantly maybe I think it helps when you have a project that's very well defined. It's true for any kind of time you got a project, but a project that's well defined, simple, and obviously has a connection to the kind of wider outdoors, which is so important to Minnesotans. And I think those projects, obviously are going to resonate with the Commission more than others. Any
concerns as you move forward with your project that funding levels might be reduced, that it could impact you as well?
You should never ask someone, the professor, that question, because we're always concerned about funding levels. And we're looking, hopefully these opportunities that come along with Asian carp to pursue this further, because we do feel that our initial results, although they're not 100%, are promising, and we do feel that we need to do more research on this.
A couple of months ago, Governor Mark Dayton publicly acknowledged Senator Jen Olson for her work in improving early childhood literacy. Here to talk about that and more broadly about the state's K12 education system, we have the chair of the Senate K12 Education Committee. Thanks for joining us, Senator Olson.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great as always to have you, and I want to begin with your work, your drive for early literacy. What role do you think early literacy for children has in improving the achievement gap?
Well, the key is reading proficiency by 3rd grade. So I encompass wherever you want to start it to at least being able to achieve proficiency by 3rd grade. And we know from research that virtually all children can reach that achievement. I think we've dismissed some children by categories, whether it's their cultural heritage or their family structure or their economic status. at socioeconomic status as possibly not being able to learn. It just isn't so. We're suffering from the discrimination of low expectations. And so this is a very important area. If you think through, as I do, you wonder why we're dealing with some of the challenges we have in terms of college and career ready, the dropout rate. Well, 40% of our young people that go on to college have to take remediation in reading and math. You know, the two basic core areas. And so I think we should be paying very close attention to what works, research-based methods, and assuring that our teachers are equipped with the tools so that all children can reach that proficiency and then be able to go on learning the myriad of things that are challenging us today in terms of being able to function in today's society.
You mentioned the word expectations a bit earlier. Recently, Education Week magazine gave Minnesota's K12 educational system a C grade. Do you think that the legislature has begun to turn the ship around, or are we still sailing in rough waters? What are your expectations?
Well, I don't think we've done enough to face some of those realities because as much as we like to complain about No Child Left Behind, it did expose the achievement gap that we have between some of our minority categories as well as the majority categories of students. And we haven't moved that needle. And so if it's a matter of expectations, and I think that is certainly key because we have evidence of schools that have the same makeup as others and are getting all their students to that point of proficiency.
A member of your education committee said that early childhood is best aided through parent involvement and the state isn't helpful. Do you think the state can be helpful?
Well, I think many of us who have been working with early childhood education believe that the parent is key and the parent should have choice. And what I am concerned about is that we not attempt to add a kind of a universal system and enlarge our current educational system to go down and capture several more years. When we can prove we can do it right in the K-12, that might be worthy of consideration. But I don't think we should be looking at early childhood as the magic bullet, that if we somehow bring that in and follow some of the same strategies that we have been, that's somehow going to turn things around.
What about all-day kindergarten?
Well, all-day kindergarten has not been proven to be essential to making those changes. Even Art Rolnick has said that it's better to invest in some of the at-risk children at age 3 and 4 than it is to provide all-day kindergarten. Many of our schools have already done it or have made choices where parents can choose electively to have their children in an all-day kindergarten program.
So let's look ahead now. What's at the top of your list this coming session when it comes to improving Minnesota's K-12 educational system?
Well, I still want to keep our focus and that we not lose sight of the approaches that we have taken to achieving that reading proficiency. We did 3 things that I was very grateful that the governor seemed to agree with and put our whole package into the final bill. And that one was that we provide an incentive to schools. It's the first time, I think, in the country that there's a revenue stream that will reward schools for the percentage of children that are at proficiency by 3rd grade. Half of the calculation is on that basis, and the other half is growth toward that end. So those that are way behind aren't just not going to get anything, but they're rewarded for their growth. And hopefully, I mean, that now amounts to like $85 per pupil, and hopefully that can grow, and that school districts will see that that's a way to add resources by achieving well. The second key one is building on what is proven to be working, and that is the Minnesota Reading Corps. That has kind of come out of the private sector, but it has been built on scientific research-based methods of teaching reading and very carefully trained instructors or tutors that are in the classroom, and it has been proving very effective. And it is functioning at both the early childhood and kindergarten level, as well as in the K-3 level. But its aim is reading proficiency by 3rd grade. And it is using some methods that I think are kind of at the heart of the problem is that some of our academic institutions in teacher preparation don't look with favor on methods that involve what they call drill and kill. Drill and practice of, actually learning or memorizing certain elements of what sounds and combinations of letter sounds are. But you need those in your head so that whenever you see them, you can apply them and without even having to think about it, and can be working then on building your fluency and your vocabulary and comprehension. And so this year it was phenomenal at the convention center to have 1,200 people in the room. About almost 800 of them were new tutors going into the classroom. That's up from about 300. And there are about 350 coaches that the schools provide. And that I took the coach training so that I understand exactly, everything is very, very well laid out and solidly research-based. And now in our bill, we tripled the amount of money going forward for the next 2 years. So the numbers I'm telling you about are this year. They haven't, the impact of what our investment is not yet felt. And then we did one more piece, and that is our local districts developing a local plan of assessing where their children are, communicating with parents so they understand that, having instructional plan for how to turn things around, provide for staff development, and develop the local plan. It doesn't have to be turned into the state, but if they put that in place, it should help them not only utilize the reading corps, which is not being forced on them. They only go if they're invited into a school. And that's, the word is getting around, and so I think that's going to continue to multiply.
So Senators, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're almost out of time, so I wanted to ask you real quickly. Students are firmly entrenched in the school year. Give me a short message for parents that they can use, take with them to help their children succeed.
Well, I think pay attention to children, talk with them in an adult language that helps to build their vocabulary. I think engage with them so that you understand when they're getting excited about having learned things, so that that is reinforced, because we know that the achievement gap can be closed and proficiency can be achieved, but it's going to take the team. That's why we want parents involved. Our schools need to be engaged, and we hope that we are putting the right policy framework in place to achieve it as well.
All right, Senator, as always, thanks for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
That concludes this week's Capitol Report. From all of us at Senate Media Services, I'm Julie Bartkey. Thank you for watching.